Welcome to Consulting for the Future, an introduction to our new program designed to empower Workday project teams. In today's rapidly evolving business landscape, the role of consulting is undergoing a significant transformation. This program is designed to equip our teams with the skills needed to navigate these changes and deliver even greater value to our customers. The industry is seeing significant shifts that require us to adapt and evolve our approach. We're facing more complex solutions and a greater focus on the entire customer lifecycle. The integration of Workday AI and an increase in post-production projects also play a crucial role in this evolving landscape. Furthermore, we're seeing growth in our partner network and a greater demand for advisory work. Our customers' expectations are also evolving rapidly, demanding more strategic and personalized interactions. Customers are now seeking strategic partners who can help them achieve new levels of success, not just deploy Workday. Feedback consistently highlights opportunities for improvement in core consultative skills. This brings us to the solution, the Consulting for the Future program. The CFTF program is an upskill initiative designed for all Workday project teams, including functional, technical consultants, and engagement managers. Our goals are clear: to shift from task takers to trusted strategic advisors and deliver exceptional customer value by bridging the gap between project objectives and true strategic business outcomes. Let's take a quick look at the program's structure. The program is structured around 3 core modules: purposeful prep for strategic engagements, foundations for consultative problem solving, and from problem solving to solution, a practical guide. Your learning journey will include self-paced modules, embedded knowledge checks, simulations, debriefs, and skills assessments to ensure practical application. Join us in Consulting for the Future and become a strategic advisor that delivers exceptional value to our Workday customers.
Oh my God, this is so much better. So, moving from a reactive problem solver to a strategic partner fundamentally changes how you approach your day to day interactions. So, reactive consultants ask for a list of current processes and requirements and focus on replicating the as is state in Workday. Uh, Strategic consultants, on the other hand, ask why a process exists, challenges the legacy processes that don't add value, and then lead with process thinking to design a future to be state that is more efficient and user friendly. I find it really difficult to have some of these conversations. In a lot of cases, when you shift over to asking why, people get defensive or they challenge your authority to ask why, instead of you just simply replicating what they have put in front of you. The problem with replicating things is that you fundamentally cut off the likelihood of you having outsized return. So the return on investment of you replicating the existing problems inside of a system that moves slightly faster is it's fairly low. It's also true with AI, right? Like a lot of times when we're talking about our AI development cycles, and opportunities that are available, folks just say, hey, well, this is our process as is today. And we want it to stay like this, but we want to maybe generate a summary of us doing this process that no one's going to read. Or let's summarize this and turn it into a long form document, which turns into like documentation sprawl that is not even necessarily high fidelity. I think those are some of the low hanging fruits that people always jump on. But in a lot of cases, you could fundamentally eliminate a lot of the documentation needs. You can eliminate some of the process steps. And if you're able to do that, that's when you start seeing real value. And that's when you start seeing an opportunity for people to spend more time talking to their customers, thinking about what their customers need, and building the next wave of services or products versus executing on the basic processes that only a few people really enjoy spending their time on. So I also think that reactive consultants have a tendency to ask for data extracts and focus on the technical requirements for loading that data. Whereas better and more strategic consultants establish a data governance framework from day one. They ask critical questions like who owns this data, who's responsible for its quality, and will we maintain data integrity post go live? How will we maintain data integrity post go live? And then they recommend data cleanup initiatives before the migration begins. I've spent a lot of time migrating data that ultimately should have been thrown out in the first place. And if you don't do these cleanup exercises prior, then what you find is that you have a lot of junk on the other side. A good example that's incredibly recent for me is I migrated from Outlook to Gmail, and I had a lot of rules in my Outlook. Many of those rules I don't even utilize anymore. And they have no real value for me other than that they were things that I had. Well, in doing so, I ended up with hundreds of labels inside of Gmail, and the rules were mangled and broken. They stepped on top of each other. If I would have deleted all of those rules out of Outlook before the migration, then I would have started with a clean sheet of paper and I would have had a better experience. But Didn't do that. All right, let me jump in a meeting. All right, now let's talk about more about reactive consultants now that I'm off of that meeting. But I think that one of the issues with reactive consultants is they tend to accept the client's list of desired reports and integrations without question. Um, I find myself doing this a lot too. And every time I do it is because of time. A lot of times I'm in a crunch and I need to just move forward so I can get to a particular milestone. And doing the strategic approach eats away a lot more time and care. And one of the things that I think is really great about like a lot of automation and things that people are fearful about is like with more automation, I have a lot more opportunity to really getting there and help a client prioritize based on business impact and then recommend a phased approach. So say, let's focus on 15 critical reports for day one success. After we finish building that and we make a roadmap for what we'll need for the next 6 months, and then kind of think about the world in that with that approach, simultaneously focusing in on enabling the team to self-serve for reporting. And when I first came over to Workday, one of the big challenges I had talking to finance folks was how do we get you to go from a centralized approach to planning and budgeting, for example, to a decentralized approach where they would say things like, oh, we want to move to a zero-based approach, but we don't have time. Oh, we want to use some kind of like bottom-up guidance or top-down guidance with a bottom-up approach, but we don't have time for that. So we're just going to do a top-down. We're going to make some assumptions. Those assumptions are not going to be based on a lot, but people are going to have to comply. So here are our assumptions. Go. Whereas we were saying to them, hey, get everyone their own little active dashboard where they can make inputs into their active dashboard, make adjustments, and do a level of kind of scenario planning and scenario modeling on their own, just in the context of their work, right? People will love it. And if you're able to record some of those scenarios, it also will give you an opportunity to have a better conversation with some of your operational leaders. And if you set up these dashboards so that they show things visually, so that if someone learns by or like works from a visual point of view, they want to see pie graphs that talk about every aspect of their business. Or if you have someone over here who wants a spreadsheet, they can have their spreadsheet. And then you get to add in somebody who wants natural language now, someone who wants to just talk about what they need. And you now have all of those options. Get to that point. If you get to that point, now you can let that guidance build itself up. And you can get to a point where, sure, you might want to look at last year or previous years to get an idea, but you're actually able to do true zero-based budgeting and forecasting. To just start over every single year, redo assumptions, and then run a comparison of previous years so that you can kind of look at trends and baselines. But it's so much more valuable to a business because the world does change and that change is accelerating. So I think that's the shift to strategic that ultimately we're looking for in the world. But it's very difficult to make it happen. So I think that we have to get better at the preparation aspect of customer engagements. And we have to create a theory, make a thesis instead of doing research where we're just gathering a bunch of facts, go a little bit further than that and prepare a actual thesis for what you want the strategic customer engagement to turn into. So strategic engagements begin before the first meeting. They definitely do. The prepare phase is about proactively acquiring knowledge you need to ask the right questions and understand the customer's world. So the prepare phase consists of three key components. One is understanding your customer's context. So get those facts, begin the researching the customer's industry, their specific business motivations. And this will allow you to build trust and clarity by speaking to the customer's business language. In my case, I switched over from working with all commercial, retail, hospitality businesses that were focused on profit to working with institutions, states, cities, counties, and the agencies related to them. Their motivations are drastically different. And even saying the word business to a state and local government doesn't feel right to some of them. Some of them you lose a bit of credibility, maybe not a big chunk of it, but it's like rubbing sandpaper on a ball. If you keep rubbing it, it will eventually round the ball. And sometimes the texture of that ball was your credibility. So if you understand the message that I'm trying to deliver here, you really have to make sure you're speaking the customer's language. Another point is about analyzing the project scope. So if you thoroughly review all of the statements of work, you understand what happened in a sales process or sales cycles or previous sales cycles, and clearly define the project's objectives and deliverables. Then if you do those two things, then you're like 60% there. And then you identify all the potential gaps and opportunity. If you synthesize your understanding of the customer's goal and the project scope to proactively identify critical gaps, risk, or complexities before they become problems, and maybe, just maybe, take that next step and identify possible solutions to ensure the customer's objectives are met and value is added. Now you are actually prepared and you have a theory. That working theory is not something to get super caught up on. In my case, I frequently try to disprove my own theories. I'm pressure testing them. So I've done my research. I understand the customer's context. I've analyzed the scope. So I went from wide, like what is your context generally, to narrow, like what is our project about? What are we doing together? Narrow. And then I start thinking about all the gaps and opportunities that are in between. And this to me came more from my sales training than from my client side, like engagement and retentions training. In the sales world, you're thinking like, oh, okay, what is the white space and where can we sell additional things? But in my context, in the consulting context, it's like, all right, where are the opportunities and risk that have this same white space of no solution, no consideration potentially, and most clearly no plan? And can I add an element or at least motivate folks to start thinking about these areas so that we have a better connection between that broad context, broad customer context, and our project scope? Because if we can connect those two things completely, if we get to 100%, then we'll have a perfect outcome, but we'll never get to 100%. So we chase 80, 85. I do think that a lot of times you can spend an infinite number of cycles thinking about opportunities and gaps. So you have to like choose to stop at some point, and to take that next step. But for me, I feel like a lot of the synthesis happens while you're in the data collection phase. So um, as you're collecting information and still having the goal that you want to generate some insights, you want to build a theory, right? As you're collecting the data, uh, as you figure out like what are performance indicators, like what do we measure that align specifically to the outcomes that we want, lagging, leading, whatever, right? Like what can we measure? When you start thinking through like the regulatory compliance and governance landscape, what standards govern the work that we're going to be doing? A lot of times these are limiting capability, like limiting where like actual capabilities are limited by the regulatory and compliance landscape. I'll take it even further. Sometimes the regulatory and compliance landscape doesn't catch up with the ethical, unethical landscape. And I think it's important to process the ethical implications of everything you do. And then turn that into critical configuration needs and potential risk from compliance issues from the outset. Because if you do this well, then you can avoid some really expensive rework or even provide more confidence to the customer. Granted, you got to keep a very clear line between legal compliance related advice and just recommendations from experience. Those are not the same. They're not equal. But I do think when you can provide meaningful like experience, it's really valuable to the clients. And you can include the disclaimers like, hey, this is not legal advice, buddy. Uh, you got to also keep in mind some of the macro events, so key industry trends and disruptors, major shifts in technology, business models, and things changing. For example, the rise of AI in financial services or supply chain logistics and manufacturing. These are just things that fundamentally change the way you operate. And by understanding them, you can position yourself to be future ready and you can build towards the future in a lot of cases. What I mean by that is you're just setting up a scaffold. Before you can work on a skyscraper, you got to figure out how you're going to get up there. You can't put windows in if you can't get up there. So a lot of times if you set up those scaffolds and you're prepared for the future, when the windows are ready, when the windows are there, you just simply pop them in. Boom. And now people are like, whoa, how did you get that done so fast? And if you can create a couple of those moments, then you become invaluable to a client. You also got to think through all the common pain points. So the typical operation within whatever industry, the standardized, efficient business processes that successful companies use to overcome them and the connection between them. We got to make those recommendations. Like, hey, go to the well before we start getting creative. This approach enables you to envision and optimize process from the start rather than simply mirroring the customer's current possibly inefficient workflows. By doing so, you can actively lead them towards a more efficient, best practice solution, which is central to your value proposition. In terms of industry specifics and terminology and acronyms, and the unique jargon in a given industry, using the customer's vocabulary is crucial for credibility. And I feel like I've talked about this a little bit about like calling a government a business, but the municipality or institution could perceivably take offense to it. It demonstrates an understanding of their context and builds rapport and helps avoid miscommunication that can ultimately hinder design. And the bottom line is like you can get really good at this stuff in the age of AI. For example, you could ask Gemini to quickly synthesize a vast amount of public information, summarize complex industry reports and financial statements, and identify key patterns related to market trends, competitive landscapes, and organization strategies. From there, Gemini is going to be like, here's so much information. If you're able to consume that and then make it customer specific, make it concise and insightful, that's the way to harness AI. I used to believe that an effective prompt went through the role, task, and desired output formula. I'm finding with like Opus 4.8 and above, having a back and forth dialogue is more valuable than assigning a role. And you don't necessarily gain from laying out specific tasks, but putting a lot of constraints around your desired outputs is super valuable. So I like to put the constraints around my desired outputs as a skill. No matter what AI I'm using, I want it to be a skill that's known. We all agree that this is what we do when we're producing this type of output for this. So inside of my own Claude I have a skill for presentation creation. I have a skill for like story writing. I have skills for all of these things. And it does a couple of things. One, it really does capture my actual voice. It sounds like me. So the way that I speak here, the way I'm talking in these videos is also pretty similar to like the outputs you get out of my skill utilizing Claude prompts. And I've put a lot of energy and effort into training. In fact, I will take this transcript from this whole entire video and take it out, pull it up, chop it into a bunch of bits, and then upload it in and say, this is what I sound like. And the goal of creating a skill or creating a dossier of my own actual voice is not so that like I can generate things that actually sound like me, but if I'm thinking through like, how am I going to talk about this presentation? How do I want to talk about this material? I can actually generate a script that follows my natural flow, that follows my mental, like linear approach to thinking. It's not really linear. My mind is very associative. So I bounce around, but I think I'm a good communicator in person because the unpredictability of my like conversation style actually retains attention longer more often than people who have a strictly linear approach. Sometimes you just got to shock the audience. And sometimes you do that with energy and hand movements and gestures and things like that. But sometimes you do it by surprising them with an insight that's not necessarily as connected as they might have expected it to be. And while there is a true trade-off for people who struggle with nonlinear thinking, I find that with senior executives, you need to be able to tell a story. And that story should take on the structure of a fiction story. Exciting, engaging with characters. The characters are like lived. You want to do some world building. You want to establish context. You want to build around that stuff. So my perspective on these presentations and on these engagements is heavy listening, sound like you, and for that reason, I think creating skills, creating the right context inside of your AI models is completely invaluable. So the next thing that I want to talk about is, I guess, some methods for understanding the why behind the what. And so I have a book over here somewhere on this gigantic bookshelf. Well, I thought I did it. I don't see it very quickly. But it's called Start With Why by Simon Sinek. And it means just that, start with why. And in a client context, a lot of times you don't even get close to starting with why when they are engaging with you. Most of the questions that I actually receive are how questions. How do we create this report with these dimensions? And I want this to calculate here, and I want this to drive that. How? How do we do it? And that's a question that has a clear answer. It frequently has a clear answer. And it's easy to answer that question than to interrogate it. Okay, so why? Why do you need to create this report? Who does it serve? What is the purpose? And you have to ask that question while also respecting the time of the client and um, helping them understand that your objective is to understand the why so that you can design something more appropriate or the best option for them. Uh, so you can receive a couple of objections. Commonly, people will be like, I just want to know how to do this because this is an emergency. And that is a great way to spend a lot of money over time, where you just create all of these random custom reports that are single use. Uh, and they were made in a hurry. So there's not like a convention around like creating these reports. It's just now we got all of these reports and we don't know which one does what. We don't know the calculations. We don't understand the formulas underneath them. We don't know who made them, right? Like, so if you ask why do you need this report with these dimensions? What is it going to do for you all? And sometimes they don't know the answer to that question. It's like, well, this is what our leadership sent us to get back. And it's like, okay, why did your leadership want it? And sometimes they're like, oh, well, they have to produce a report for this agency in Amsterdam. And maybe we've done that multiple times. Maybe we've done it 5,000 times that we've produced this report for a variety of entities. And instead of you asking us to help you with this Amsterdam agency compliance report, you asked us how to set up these dimensions and these columns with these formulas. And now we don't have the ability to go reference this report that we've created 5,000 times because everybody who operates in Amsterdam has to generate this report for the said agency. And an exercise that is now 200 hours of report writing and building and et cetera, may have been one of our standard reports that's already available. We have to capture some of those things. We have to catch them. And if we don't catch them, what tends to happen is we get going on this project. Everyone's upset about it. So the leadership team who requested that you produce this information is upset about the turnaround time. And then they get the bill and they're like, whoa, why did we spend so many hours on this report? Don't they do this a lot? How many customers do they have that operate here? Everybody has to do this. And then they're like, wait, you didn't tell us about this was a standard thing from whatever. You just said you wanted this information. And then I asked them how to make it. And now I guess we're not unhappy per se, like as the consultant, because hey, well, we gave you what you asked for. It cost us a lot of money, and that shows up on our P&L. So success. But we also could have given that to them, handed them over like something that's already complete, made a couple of minor tweaks just to make sure, and then spent more time looking at like validation and stuff like that. Secondly, thinking about how to optimize or grow or do something completely different that has significantly more value. But the investment was misplaced. So I think the cornerstone of strategic consulting is a critical part of preparation. because it involves moving beyond stated requirements and understanding the fundamental business outcome that the customer needs to achieve. And by deeply preparing and uncovering these motivations, you set the stage for more targeted and effective solutions. I think from like a onboarding point of view, as you're onboarding with a client, then it's like you'll have some type of documentation from like the sales to services documentation. If you carefully read a statement of work or sales discovery notes, you can grasp some technical details and the customer's main objective, as they'll ultimately guide all of those questions and configuration decisions. And then you should leverage the engagement managers and folks who facilitated conversations to better define the customer's objectives and to help validate some of those assumptions and identify a lot of the potential risk. If you analyze the prescriptive solution, so a lot of times that how question comes from a prescriptive solution, you should scrutinize that as an individual before you start. And if you understand the business problem and how each configuration solves and its value so to the customer's objective, then you can effectively communicate to all the stakeholders involved, like, hey, here's what I'm recommending that might be slightly different from what you were prescribed in the first place. And to have that conversation credibly, you're going to need to have some measurable output. So you got to think through like and capture any measurable outcome things that may have been stated in some of that earlier documentation, but is ultimately going to be the leverage you need to be able to move from what to why. I guess when we start thinking about the differences between what and why, it feels very natural for a lot of people who are why-brained. So for me, I'm always thinking this way. So when someone says, "Hey, I want to implement a new talent acquisition system," I'm like, "Oh, you want to reduce your time to hire by 20, 30% and secure top talent from your competitors and decrease the total cost of your recruiting process." Which one's what? Which one's why? Right? And that's the mindset. So when you say, "Hey, I want to implement a talent acquisition solution," it's like, "Solution? Okay, sure. What?" And now the next question is like, how do you implement it? Well, obviously, there's a lot of ways to implement things. There's a lot of choices involved, but I know that we need to reduce our time to hire by 20 to 30% and secure top talent faster, which is natural, right? Like you can make that leap by yourself for that specific example, but in more complex examples, sometimes that leap is a little bit more difficult to make. But if the emphasis is, say, um, decreasing recruiting costs, maybe the actual issue is opposite from what we expect. Maybe we think that we need to do a better job at attracting top talent. And that might mean that our talent acquisition solution is much more focused on the talent branding and like creating signals in the market and like getting people excited about our us as a possibility, which might run the opposite direction from decreasing recruiting costs. And you have to think about those things in balance. Which one is the like top priority? Uh, there may be opportunities to achieve both with some technology deployment, but in a lot of cases, these are opposite things where the brand improvements and like getting top talent might be a more expensive process, more expensive like exposures, more marketing spend, things along those lines, than what you were spending today. If decreasing the cost is the actual priority, then maybe you just need to increase efficiency. Maybe a lot more of your work is on like, how do we help our recruiters disposition more folks? How do we help them get through the onboarding sequence faster? How do we help get job descriptions and things like that produced more efficiently? How do we cut approvals out of the process? How do we have more things happen in parallel, right? Completely different goals, which might turn into completely different approaches to the effort. So instead of just asking why, you could say, hey, can you help me understand the long-term vision? So I'm trying to remember what was my other example, but let's say that someone says to you, "Hey, can you show us how to set up the talent acquisition solution?" Like, sure. Can you help me understand the long-term vision? By asking the long-term impact on their business specifically, uh, you'll understand what they want to change before they start saying that this was a successful project. And you can help them visualize the future benefits. So in their long-term vision, it's like, hey, we spend $7 million a year on recruiting. We need that number to be 3 million maximum. Okay. Right? Or you can ask them something more along the lines of like, can you talk to me about some of your operational headaches before we get going on this project? You'll understand their pain points, things they want to eliminate permanently, and maybe highlight aspects of the project where they want to improve efficiency or outcomes. So if there are operational headaches or too many approvals, too many notifications, things like that, hey, sometimes it's going the opposite way. Maybe it was like, we don't have enough approvals, we don't have enough control, we don't have enough notifications. So you could go in either one of those directions, but you have to understand those things. And then you have to identify what the wins are for the sponsors. So in a lot of cases, we'll have a project manager or engagement manager, or a project lead or a functional lead who is the person driving this conversation from our seat. And we don't have access to the actual sponsor. But it's imperative that you go beyond the technical requirements and discover the overarching success for that project sponsor, um, so that you can work towards that objective. Because if you lose the context of that objective, then you've lost the context of the customer. You've lost the context of everything that you build. So your mindset might be completely off from what they hope to achieve, and that gap will grow as you get deeper into the project. And in a lot of cases, it emerges in a decision where you holding all of the technical skill and knowledge might make a recommendation that feels like the authoritative approach, and the client sitting in their seat, they agree primarily because they don't fully understand and don't have the complete background to disagree or challenge it effectively. But once they get to a point where they're testing it, they will tell you, hey, this is not what we were looking for. And this was your recommendation. And you need to avoid those circumstances. And the way to avoid those circumstances is by getting up to why. Um, the truth of the matter is, I think that most of those, uh, the why questions kind of fall into only a few buckets. So, in a lot of cases, people want consistent processes globally. Uh, in some cases, people just want a single system of record. Sometimes they're like, hey, we just need to attract and retain our top talent. Maybe they want to drive user engagement and satisfaction, ensure compliance, security of data, or anything else, design scalability and adaptability. Perhaps they want to enhance data transparency and accessibility. Maybe it's about operational costs. Maybe it's about process efficiency. I think that for the most part, things fall into these categories related to enterprise systems. So if you're able to get to the why, then you can talk about things with those in context. And it's important to kind of ground recommendations in how they help you approach some of those big picture objectives. And I just said objectives when I meant outcomes. Ha ha. Got more work questions. Oh, all right. Product declined. Determination to separate data. Data sync fix. The roadmap. So I do think about I find it difficult for me to always run this balance where I have to develop um, strong opinions, but also hold them very lightly. And the reason I find that difficult is because the act of developing these opinions is like something that your ego gets attached to. It's like, hey, I think this is the right way to go. The truth of the matter is that I'm an external party to my clients and their teams and the outcomes they hope to achieve. I frequently won't be a true beneficiary of the actual outcome. I also don't carry the risk of the failure from the actual outcomes that kind of exist. So I've been working through this like approach where I'll work with our internal experts. I'll work with partners. I'll work with whoever to um, develop what I call a resolution blueprint, which is really just a action plan to address whatever gaps we've identified or problems or issues. Um, and then I analyze those resolution blueprints. Um, and then I try to compare them with other similar clients who had similar issues. And then I run a quick screen for its alignment with the broader business objective, process complexities, stakeholder misalignment, or politics. Um, and then I develop and formulate the strong opinion. I always write it out. I write out a strong opinion. Um, Based on that strong opinion, I then rewrite it so that it is a lightly held position that is meant to foster collaborative and solution oriented partnership with the client. So when you read the things that I've developed, when you read the dialogue between me and my clients, you never see me saying, this is the way for sure. I always send open feedback around constraints and the ideas that I want to share. And then I present like my recommended approach. And then I ask for scrutiny, giving them a green light to rip it apart. So as an individual, I love it when people rip my ideas apart. I do not like when people say no or ignore my idea, and they don't want to offer scrutiny for the wise. And they don't want to necessarily offer a secondary recommendation or better approach. That's the way to irritate me. And I personally have to work on not being as irritated by that. But the bottom line is that those scenarios are really difficult to deal with because they lead to stagnation. And that stagnation leads to escalation. And sometimes the escalation is internal, sometimes it's external, but I really, really believe that the best way to avoid that is by asking for or opening up your feedback and recommendations so that they come off as lightly held and open to challenge. Because when you receive those challenges, then you can apply the scrutiny. In a lot of cases, the client's right. In a lot of cases, my write-up, my explanation of my perspective was inefficient or not complete. And so the opportunity to go back to the well and redraw your approach, very valuable. The opportunity to clarify, really valuable. The opportunity to see why you're wrong and learn and become a better consultant, stakeholder, wonderful. All of those options are great. What's the worst case scenario is you send over something that appears to be a strongly held requirement or recommendation, and for that feedback to not come back because of someone either doesn't think of you as credible enough to argue with, or they don't want to offend or burn cycles with a back and forth, which are not good scenarios. And then there's that third part around like, how do you react when someone pushes back? Which you don't want to extend it back and forth. You want scrutiny. You want to do a little jujitsu. So jujitsu is the art of kind of using someone's momentum to direct them where you want them to go. I don't necessarily feel like the objective is to direct them where I want them to go, but your first step, my first step, is always to lean in and assume that they're right. Turn myself off, turn my ego off, and say, okay, if they're right, how do we know that they're right? How do we prove that they're right? How do we fight that and accept me as the wrong party and then take the next steps appropriately? And when you're dealing with complex things like enterprise-wide deployments, this is such a valuable mindset, because otherwise you'll find yourself in these like long, extended cycles of debate that ultimately don't do too much for you. And in cases where you're completely right and you know it, if you take on like the scientific approach of falsifying your assumptions and they stand up to that scrutiny, then you become even more confident. And ultimately, you tend to get your way because people recognize that you rerun the cycles to disprove your own initial theory. When you don't do it, people also recognize that. And I think the phrase is intellectual honesty. Intellectual honesty will take you a long way.